People said that Elias Whitmore could buy the entire region of New Mexico outright if he wanted to. His railroad stretched out like the lines of a palm crossing the desert. His herds of cattle were so numerous that it took cowboys 3 days to complete a single lap around the ranch. Deep underground, his silver mines still spewed out gleaming white metal day and night, turning into numbers in ledger books that even Elias did not bother to count. People called him the king of the New Mexico region. They tipped their hats when he passed by. They lowered their voices when mentioning his name. But not a single one among them dared to look Elias straight in the eyes for too long, because there was nothing in those eyes. No anger, no joy, not even sadness. Only a cold emptiness, like the bottom of a dry well in the middle of the dry season. Elias woke up before dawn and went to sleep after midnight. He ate alone in a long dining room that could hold 40 people, under a crystal chandelier, imported all the way from Europe. His chef used to cook for governors. But Elias could never remember what he had just eaten. Food, to him, was just fuel, like coal poured into the boiler of a locomotive. Margaret Finch, the loyal secretary who had followed him for 12 years, was the only one who understood the truth. She had seen him sign a contract that caused 300 families to lose their homes, without batting an eye. And she had also seen him standing alone by the window before dawn, looking out at the pitch-black desert, his shoulders slightly slumped, as if carrying something heavier than his entire fortune. "The boss has everything," Margaret once whispered to Samuel Boone, Elias's loyal carriage driver. Yet, I have never seen him smile, not even once. Samuel merely nodded, tightening the reins, because he knew there were things money could not buy, and one of those, Elias Whitmore had lost a very long time ago. His ex-wife, Eleanor, had understood that before he even did. She left on an autumn morning, without raising her voice, without tears. She only left a short letter on the expensive oak table. "I have lived beside the richest man in the region, but I have never felt so cold and lonely. You do not need a wife, Elias. You only need another asset to put on display." Elias read the letter exactly one time. Then he folded it, put it away in a drawer, and threw himself into work with a ferocity that even he could not understand. He told himself that he had won, that he needed no one. But during the long, cold nights in the immense mansion, Elias sometimes dreamed of something strange. The smell of kitchen smoke, the smell of cornbread baking over charcoal, and the skinny hands of a woman he had not allowed himself to remember for 30 years. He always woke up before he could clearly see her face. In July of 1887, Elias set off for a small town named Red Hollow. On paper, it was a short trip to sign a contract. His new railway line needed to pass through a strip of land, and that strip of land happened to lie right at the foot of the town of Red Hollow. According to the plan, they would buy up the entire poor residential area, level it, and lay steel rails over the old foundations of hundreds of people. To Elias, it was just a line of numbers in a ledger. He had never even set foot in Red Hollow. But the western desert does not care how rich you are. At noon, when the sun hung suspended like a wet-hot iron, the rear axle of Elias's horse carriage snapped off. The carriage tilted entirely to one side, sinking into the scorching hot sand. Samuel Boone jumped down, shaking his head. "It will take at least 2 hours to fix, sir. There is a small diner up ahead. You should go in there to escape the sun." Elias intended to refuse. He did not like places that were cramped, dusty, and full of the smell of people. But the western sun shows no respect to anyone. Sweat ran down his spine, and his expensive coat stuck to his skin. Finally, he stepped down, dusted off his sleeves, and walked toward the dilapidated wooden cabin by the side of the road. On the crooked hanging wooden sign, someone had carved the words, "Dawson's Hearth, Dawson Family Kitchen." And then it hit him. Not a sound, not an image, but a scent. The smell of wood smoke. The smell of stew bubbling in a cast-iron pot. The smell of cornbread with crispy golden brown edges. The smell of black coffee chewed directly over glowing coals. Elias stopped dead in his tracks in the middle of the doorway. For a moment, just one moment, the richest man in the New Mexico region was no longer the king of the railroad. He reverted to a skinny, barefoot boy, standing before the door of a shabby wooden cabin in a distant winter, where a woman turned to look at him and smiled through the kitchen smoke. Elias's heart, the thing he believed had died long ago, suddenly beat with a sharp pang. He did not understand why. He only knew that his feet had walked inside on their own. The diner was small and simple. A few rough wooden tables, a fireplace built of smoke-blackened stone. Hanging on the wall were bundles of dried corn and an old rifle. Behind the kitchen counter was a young woman. Her hair was tied neatly back, with a few strands falling and clinging to the sweat at her temples. Her sleeves were rolled up high, revealing sun-baked and firm arms. She was stirring the pot of stew, stirring while softly singing an old melody. That was Clara Mae Dawson. She looked up at the stranger. A tailored suit, polished shoes that were now covered in road dust, a cold, emotionless face. She showed no fear, nor did she flatter him. She simply nodded, as she would with anyone else. Sit anywhere. Today we have beef and bean stew, cornbread and coffee. Just that. Elias was used to people bowing their heads before him. The calm indifference of this girl made him falter slightly. He sat down at the table near the fireplace. A moment later, she placed a piping hot plate of food in front of him. The beef was tenderly braised, deeply flavored. The stewed beans smelled fragrantly of smoke. The cornbread was golden brown, crispy on the outside, soft and moist on the inside. And a cup of black coffee, thick and hot. Elias picked up his spoon, mechanically, just as he had eaten for all those years. Then he swallowed the first bite, and his hand froze in mid-air. His personal chef used to cook for governors. He had attended banquets with French wine and rare wild game meats, but never, not once in 30 years, had he tasted anything that made his throat choke up like this moment. Because Clara's plate of food was not luxurious at all, but it had one thing that all of Elias's banquets lacked. It had the warmth of a home. From inside the kitchen, an old voice echoed out. It was Martha Dawson, Clara's mother, who stepped out leaning on a cane with gentle eyes. A distinguished guest, right? This young man looks like he has been hungry for a very long time, Clara. I am not hungry, Elias blurted out. But as soon as he said it, he knew it was the biggest lie of his life. He was hungry, hungry for 30 years, only he had never known what he was hungry for. The carriage had been fixed long ago, but Elias kept returning to Red Hollow. The first time, he told himself it was because of the food. The second time, he told Samuel that he needed to survey the terrain. By the third time, the fourth time, he stopped looking for excuses. He came back because of Clara, because of the way she looked at him, not like a walking bag of money, but as a human being, because of the way she argued back when he said something wrong, something no one had dared to do for many years, because her laughter echoed in the small diner, warm like the fire in a winter fireplace. They sat and talked for hours after the diner closed. Clara talked about her father, who had died in a mine collapse, about her mother, who had carried the burden of raising her through this very diner, about Red Hollow, a poor town, but her entire world. People just assume there is nothing here, Clara said, her eyes gazing out at the flickering oil lamp. But you know, every brick in this diner has a story. My father built that fireplace with stones he picked up from the northern stream. The table you are sitting at is where I learned to read and write. This land cannot be sold, Mr. Whitmore, Because it is not land. It is home. Elias sat still. In his coat pocket, close to his chest, was the contract. The contract that would turn this diner, this fireplace, this table, into ashes beneath the steel rails. He had not yet told her who he was, what he came to Red Hollow to do. With each passing day, he became even more incapable of saying it out loud. And that was when the secret began to turn into a ticking time bomb. Tick-tock, tick-tock, right inside his own chest. The truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deep people bury it. It surfaced through the mouth of Silas Crow, a casino owner, a land speculator who had secretly manipulated Red Hollow for many years. He was the middleman, the one who wanted to sell out the entire town to Elias and pocket a massive profit, ignoring the hundreds of people losing their homes. And Silas Crow did not like the fact that Elias kept lingering around the Dawson girls' diner. One afternoon when Clara went to the grocery store to buy supplies, Silas blocked her way, flashing a sinister smile. "Do you know who the rich man that often visits your diner is, Miss Dawson? That is Elias Whitmore, the railroad tycoon. And do you know what he came to Red Hollow for?" Clara stood stunned. "To buy this land," Silas continued, his voice sweet like poisoned honey. "To flatten your trashy town, your diner, that fireplace you hold so dear. All will become railroad tracks. And here you were, thinking he was infatuated with your beef stew." That evening, when Elias stepped into the diner as usual, he knew immediately that something had shattered. Clara stood behind the counter, her back straight, her eyes red but without a single tear falling. In her hand was a piece of paper, a copy of the contract that Silas had intentionally left for her to see. "You came here to steal my home." Her voice was cold and sharp like a knife blade. "All those nights you sat and listened to me talk about the fireplace my father built, about the table where I learned to read, and in your pocket was the piece of paper that would turn it all to ash. You approached me to take the land more easily, didn't you? Clara, it is not... Don't." She slammed the paper down on the table. "I once thought you were the only person here who looked at me like a human being. It turns out that to you, I am just another line of numbers in your ledger." For the first time in his life, Elias Whitmore could not find a single word to say, because every word he could utter would be a lie, or a truth even crueler than silence. He turned his back and walked out of the diner, leaving behind the sound of a slamming door, and something inside his chest breaking that he could not name. That night, Elias did not sleep. He sat alone in the town's inn room, and for the first time in 30 years, he allowed the past to flood back. He remembered the shabby wooden cabin where he grew up. He remembered the starving winters. He remembered his mother, who had cooked meager meals for him on a wood stove, but always poured all that she had into them. He remembered that final winter, when she coughed up blood, when there was no money to buy medicine, when he, a 12-year-old boy, watched helplessly as the only person who loved him slowly faded away in the bitter cold. By her sickbed, his mother had held his hand and said, "Do not let life turn you into someone who only knows money, Elias. The richest person is not the one who has the most, but the one who knows how to give." The boy Elias had sworn to never be poor again, and he had kept that vow. He became the richest man in the region. But on that path, he had lost the very final advice of his mother. He had become the exact type of person she feared most, someone who had everything, but no longer had a heart. Clara's food had awakened all of those things, and now he understood why he kept going back. It was not because of the beef stew, but because that girl had accidentally given back to him something he thought was dead, his true self. Just as he was sinking into those thoughts, an alarm bell rang out, tearing through the night. "Fire! Fire! The Dawson Diner is on fire!" Elias rushed out the door. At the end of the street, raging red flames were devouring the small Dawson's Hearth diner. Thick smoke billowed up into the night sky. Silas Crow had ordered someone to set the fire. A warning, a way to force Clara and her mother to leave. And Elias saw Clara screaming and crying outside. "My mother! My mother is still in there!" People stood watching, terrified, no one daring to rush into the sea of fire. In that moment, Elias Whitmore did not think of his fortune. He did not think of the contract. He did not think of anything but the old woman trapped in the blaze. He took off his coat, dipped it into a water barrel by the road, draped it over his head, and charged straight into the flames. Inside was a hellscape. The smoke was thick and scorching. The burning red wooden beams creaked overhead. Elias crawled on the floor, following his memory toward the kitchen, where Martha Dawson usually sat. He found her unconscious next to the stone fireplace, the fireplace that her husband had built with stones picked up from the northern stream. Elias slipped his arms underneath her, lifting her onto his shoulders. She was weightless, fragile as a dried leaf. Just as he turned around, a burning beam fell, striking his shoulder. A tearing pain ripped through his body. Elias gritted his teeth, not letting go of the woman on his shoulders. He staggered through the sea of fire, step by step, heading toward the light at the door. Then he tumbled outside, right at Clara's feet, the old mother still intact in his arms. The crowd gasped. People hurried to pull Martha away, dousing her with water. Performing resuscitation, she coughed violently and lived. Clara knelt beside Elias. His shoulder was charred, blood seeping through the layers of his shirt. His face blackened with smoke. But he still opened his eyes to look at her. "Is she all right?" he asked, his voice thick and hoarse. Clara looked at this man, the one who had intended to rob her of her home, the one who had lied to her, now lying here, wounded because he had used his own body to save her mother. It was the first time in his life that Elias Whitmore protected someone else, not with money but with his own flesh and blood. But Clara did not cry. She did not forgive. She only looked at him and said a sentence that hurt him more than the wound on his shoulder. "Saving a person in one night does not erase what you intended to destroy for many years, Elias. Thank you, but I still cannot look at you the same as before." Then she stood up, turned toward her mother, leaving Elias lying there with physical pain, and another pain, much deeper. During the days of his recovery, Elias stood at the crossroads of his life. On one side were Silas Crow and the contract. Signing it, he would gain another massive fortune, expand his railroad empire, and become the person he had tried his whole life to become. On the other side was Red Hollow, a poor town, a diner burnt to charcoal, and a girl who refused to forgive him. He sought out Clara once more, bringing an offer that to him was the most generous. He would build her a mansion, bring her in as his personal chef, and give her and her mother a life where they would never have to worry. Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she shook her head. "I was not born to warm the cold house of a man who does not know how to keep a fire," she said. "You want to buy me with a mansion, just like you have bought everything else. But there are things that are not for sale, Elias. A home is one of them, and a person too." That sentence followed Elias for many nights. And then he understood something. The problem had never been that Clara needed him to save her. The problem was that he himself needed to be saved. And she had done that, not by accepting him, but by rejecting him, forcing him to look straight at himself. The day of the town meeting arrived. At the Red Hollow Square, under the harsh sunlight, the townspeople gathered in full force. Silas Crow stood there, looking triumphant, waiting for Elias to put pen to paper and sign the final contract, the contract that would wipe out their town. Margaret Finch handed the contract to Elias. The ink pen was ready. The whole town held its breath. Elias picked up the piece of paper, looked at it for a very long time. Then, in front of everyone, he tore it in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the silence of the entire square. One piece, then two pieces, then shredding into small fragments, falling to the dusty ground. Several $100,000, an entire railroad empire, shattered into pieces of paper blowing in the desert wind. "I will not destroy Red Hollow," Elias declared, his voice ringing clear. "The railway line will detour around the edge of the town. I will return the land ownership rights to all the families who have lived here. This land belongs to you. It has always belonged to you." The townspeople were stunned, then burst into uproar, but Silas Crow did not. His face twisted in rage. The entire fortune he dreamed of had just vanished. He drew the revolver tucked at his hip, pointing it straight at Elias. "Traitor! You made me lose everything!" Time seemed to stop. But before Silas could pull the trigger, Samuel Boone lunged forward to shield Elias, his hand resting on the grip of his own gun. And from the other side of the crowd, Clara Mae Dawson stepped out, raising her family's old rifle, the rifle that hung on the wall of the burnt diner, and cocked it, aiming coldly at Silas. "Put the gun down, Crow," she said, her voice not trembling at all. "You burned my house. I will not let you take anything else from this town." Silas looked around. The people of Red Hollow, the ones he had once despised, were now tightening their circle around him, their eyes blazing with fire. He had gone too far, and now no one was standing on his side. The gun in his hand shook. Then the town sheriff stepped forward, disarmed him, and handcuffed him. Silas Crow was escorted away amidst the jeers of the people he had once intended to sell out. When everything settled down, Elias stood in the middle of the square, his shoulder still bandaged. And for the first time, the people of Red Hollow looked at him with a different gaze. Not the fear reserved for a tycoon, but something much warmer. The affection reserved for a human being. Elias cast his eyes around, looking for Clara. She lowered the gun, looking at him. It was still not forgiveness. But in those eyes, for the first time, there was a glimmer of something softening. It was a beginning. Elias Whitmore did not propose to Clara. He had understood, after all, that love could not be bought, nor could it be demanded. It could only be nurtured, day by day, with sincerity. So he stayed. The richest man in the New Mexico region took off his tailored suit, rolled up his sleeves, and personally helped the people of Red Hollow rebuild the Dawson's Hearth Diner. He learned how to chop wood, and accidentally chopped his own foot several times. He learned how to carry timber, hammer nails, and erect frames. The hands accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts were now calloused, full of wooden splinters and blisters. He learned to kindle a fire in the new stone fireplace. The fireplace that Clara, exactly as her father had once done, had rebuilt with stones picked up from the northern stream. He learned to chop onions until his tears flowed profusely, to the point that Martha Dawson had to burst out laughing and say, "Are you crying because of the onions, or because it is the first time in your life you actually have to do real work, Mr. Whitmore?" One morning, Clara walked into the diner and caught Elias standing by the stove, clumsily baking a batch of cornbread. The bread was half burnt, misshapen. None of them looked like anything proper. Smoke billowed up blindly, and Elias was frantically fanning it in a panic. Clara burst out laughing, a ringing, genuine laugh, the kind of laughter he had not been able to hear for a very long time. Elias turned around, his face smeared with flour, half embarrassed and half hopeful. "Is it that bad?" he asked. Clara picked up a charred piece of bread, inspecting it. Then she looked at him, and in that gaze there was finally a gentleness. Bad, she replied. But for the first time, I see you truly putting your whole heart into something. Elias did not completely abandon his old life. He still built the railway line. But this time it did not swallow Red Hollow. It ran around it, bringing people, goods, and a future to the small town that was once forgotten by the whole world. Poor families had jobs. Children had schools. Red Hollow, for the first time, had a future. And Clara did not leave her homeland to step into his cold mansion. Instead, it was Elias who had learned to step into her world. A world of kitchen smoke and road dust, of horse hooves and hot meals, of laughter and people living genuinely. A world that money could not buy, but a sincere heart could belong to. Many years later, people still recounted the story of Elias Whitmore, not about the railway line or his silver mines, but about the day he tore up the $1 million contract in the middle of the Red Hollow Square. And whenever they told it, they always ended with the same sentence. The sentence that Elias himself often said in the final years of his life, when sitting by the fireplace of Dawson's Hearth Diner, holding the hand of the woman who had taught him how to live again. Money can buy land, buy houses, buy an entire railroad line. But it can never buy a home. A home is only built with one single thing: love.